community knows all too well. This is a problem that long predated last week's shooting. Bigotry and violence against Asian Americans has been on the rise since the very start of this pandemic. What started off as dirty looks and verbal attacks has quickly escalated to deadly violence. And in fact, there have been over 3,800 anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents reported in just the past year alone. And it was just stoked by the words of Donald Trump, who used the terms China virus, Wuhan virus, and Kung flu, and doubled down on it when warned that it would hurt the Asian American community. As a result, we saw, especially in the last month, a spike against hate crimes against elderly and more vulnerable Asian Americans, including an 84-year-old in San Francisco who was assaulted and killed just when he was on his morning walk. And in New York, where a 61-year-old was slashed by a box cutter from ear to ear, requiring 100 stitches. And in my very own district, there was a man who was attacked and hit with his own cane, and it caused him to lose part of his finger. Asian Americans deserve to know that we are safe and that our voices matter. And Asian American women deserve to know that they are not simply a temptation to eliminate when a shooter is having a bad day. That is why we in the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus called for a National Day of Action and Healing yesterday, because we knew something had to be done. It was a day when everyone from all backgrounds was encouraged to stand with the Asian American community with a statement, a virtual event, or an in-person rally. I hosted my own conversation on Facebook Live called Los Angeles Speaks Out Against AAPI Hate, where victims, community leaders, and members of Congress shared their stories. And I was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. It showed that we are not alone in this fight. Fortunately, we have already gotten help from another important partner, and that is President Biden. I'm so grateful that in his first week in office, President Biden issued an executive order to address anti-Asian hate and instructed the Department of Justice to do more to help track hate crimes and discrimination. But this is just a start. Our laws are clearly not suited to this moment. That's why we are pushing for Congress to pass Grace Meng's COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and the No Hate Act to ensure that we can better track these crimes and create more resources for local communities. I want to once again thank Congressman Johnson for inviting me today as we continue to mourn the lives of these terrible murders in Georgia last week. We must do all that we can to keep our AAPI community safe. Together, we can stop Asian hate.
Thank you, Congresswoman Chu, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Travel safely and have a nice day. Next, we will hear from my other good friend, Congresswoman Grace Meng, a passionate champion for the citizens that she represents in New York's 6th District, as well as everyone else. She served in Congress since 2013, and she's the first Asian American elected to Congress from the state of New York, and serves as first vice chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific Americans Caucus. Grace Meng, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Congressman Hank Johnson, for convening us today. And your constituents probably know this already, but I just want to say thank you for always standing in solidarity and empowering the AAPI community. You have been doing it in public and behind the scenes way before this last year of increased incidents towards Asian Americans. And I've seen you work on the Hill every day to strengthen our AAPI community on many issues. And I thank you for being that important voice. I want to acknowledge some of my colleagues in government on the call today. I see Senator Sheikh Rahman, Representatives Nguyen and Marvin Lim, Commissioner Ku, and forgive me if I've left out anyone else. And as always, honored to be with my chairperson of our caucus, Judy Chu. My heart goes out to the families and the loved ones and all Georgians in the aftermath of the tragedy that happened in Atlanta. 8 people murdered, 6 Asian American women. And I want to use this opportunity and use this time in our history to uplift their stories and their contributions, not just to their own families and loved ones, but how they represent the voices and the legacies of so many Asian American women in this country. We are a community that has often been viewed as silent and invisible, and people who don't rock the boat and who just mind our own business. And I will say, after this year of increased incidents against Asian Americans, attacks against the elderly, and now these tragedies in Atlanta, we are here to say that we will be silent no more. And I'm so thankful in the past few weeks, even as tragedy hits, that we've been hearing from so many people who have maybe spoken up for the first time in their lives on their experience of being an Asian American, and to remind the country that we too are Americans. And I'm so thankful for the tremendous show of solidarity from different communities. In our own Congress, it's leaders in the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, Native Americans, many caucuses and members have shown support and stood with our community from the very beginning. And we just want to say how heartened and encouraged we are. Going forward, we need to use this opportune moment, not just to heal within our own community, but to have those difficult conversations sometimes with members within our own community. We have to address racism that's hurled at our community, and sometimes racism that is existing within our own communities. I'm so inspired and thankful to our groups, our advocacy groups, many of whom the leaders are on the phone today, for you being on the front lines of working with community members, hearing their stories and seeking solutions every single day. We cannot move forward unless we're moving forward in solidarity with everyone. Racism is never the answer to racism. It is solidarity. I'm really hopeful for the weeks and months ahead on what we will be able to accomplish together. The world has finally heard the experience of Americans who are Asian and recognize that we are American too. Thank you, Hank, for including me in today's event. And thank you always for being such a tremendous ally to our AAPI community. And we will see you in Georgia soon.
Okay, thank you so much, Grace. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And you travel safely also and have a great day. Next, I'm going to introduce to you someone who I think is probably the busiest man in Georgia. Everywhere I go, I see him, often with his wife and daughter. And if I don't see him, I wonder if I'm in the wrong place. It's none other than my good friend, State Senator Sheikh Rahman. He represents the 5th District in the Georgia State Senate, which is the heart of Georgia's most diverse county, Gwinnett County. He is a Bangladeshi American and is the first immigrant and Asian American to ever serve in the Georgia State Senate. And with that, I offer to you Sheikh Rahman. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Hank Johnson, for getting us together, and always great to see my leaders and friend Grace Meng from New York. Under the circumstances, we met I'm really mad. I'm really angry, be honest with you. I mean, that's my personal feeling. What happened in Georgia should not have happened. What's been happening since last year, in the whole year. So I'm going to come back what I'm trying to do. I actually had, as you all know, the community leaders and the elected officials, we met with President Biden. But what I thought that one thing I need to meet with my governor too. So I had really had a meeting with governor Thursday, right before, 3 hours before he signed this horrible election bill. So anyway, I went to see him. I want to see what he wants to do. First thing I requested to him that he need to come up and sit with us, either Zoom or physically, all the elected officials and the community leaders from AAPI in Georgia. We need to include everybody to hear our concern. That's first thing I want to make sure. I told him because we're going to be out of session next week. I know you're all busy. Right after the session, we need to get together and hear our concern. Another thing that I'm doing, part of, not me as a legislative body, we have 3 different bills. So I'm going to talk to you about one thing that that mostly came from House side, from our good friend and Representative Marvin Lim and B. Nguyen and Sam Parr. They're all working all hard. So we had the same bill in the House and Senate side. So I'm going to speak one of them that I talked to Governor. And I told him that we requested 911 service to our committee, AAPI committee. And I told him, with the technology and everything, he should be able to help us with that one. I know it's at the very late of the legislative session. He can do an executive order, do whatever it takes. So he said he can consider, he told his team, see what he can do. That's one thing that he can implement. We don't have to wait for the legislation. He can do as a governor. And also, I also asked him that he need to have an AAPI commission, which we had in Georgia under Democratic governor. So I told him, make sure there's a bipartisan commission. I don't want to make sure we have a lot of AAPI on both sides. So I want to make sure he need to appoint AAPI commission that looks like, what Georgia is in terms of all different AAPI community. That's what he need to do. And I told him if he can do it with executive order, or I can put a resolution. He said he gonna do an executive order. He gonna work on it. That's one thing. So anyway, and I told him that, look, we have, in terms of legislature in the House and Senate, we get 5 of us, 6 of us. So our community is strong. API community is strong in Georgia, and we're going to fight. All of us are going to fight. We're not going to go back. We're not going to stand on the sideline anymore. We're going to have a voice. We want him to do whatever he can. So I know we have a lot of speakers, so I don't want to take any more time. Thank you for organizing this thing. I really appreciate it. And anybody have any concern, you all know you can reach out to me, and I'll do whatever I can for my community, all minority community, because I represent one of the largest, most diverse Senate district in the state of Georgia. So I'm going to do for all minority, not only API. We all have to stick together to make things right for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rahman. And next, we will hear from State Representative B. Nguyen. B is a rising star in Georgia politics, first elected as the representative from the 89th District of the Georgia House of Representatives in 2017, which was Stacey Abrams' old seat. B has distinguished herself as serious and a substantive lawmaker and a leading progressive voice. She's been extremely busy of late, so we appreciate her being with us today. B, I'll never forget you during your first campaign, and when you came to my office and we sat down and talked. And I was really impressed with you then, and I'm more impressed with you after seeing you work. And so with that, I hand the mic over to you, State Representative B. Nguyen.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for putting this together. I want to thank you for your allyship and solidarity to the AAPI community, and not just to us, but to the immigrant community as a whole. You have been very vocal and have been a leader as it pertains to deportations and the issues that we have with the detention centers here in our state, especially when it comes to some of the abuses that we have seen of women who are being detained. And so that has been critically important to me. So I do want to start off by thanking you for that. You know, it has been a tremendously challenging time in Georgia, not just because of the atrocious crime that happened to the AAPI community, but also because of the onslaught of voter suppression here. And I want to start off by saying that as it pertains to the shootings in Atlanta, I have been very forthcoming in calling it a hate crime and asking it to be treated as such. You know, one of the things that we do know is that the perpetrator targeted 3 Asian businesses, driving 40 minutes from one to the next. And for any of us who live in Atlanta, we know that that specific targeting, we don't just drive from Cherokee County to Atlanta unless we have a specific purpose. And in that targeting, the result is 6 Asian women are dead under the hate crimes law that we passed in Georgia last legislative session. We protect gender and sex. So one of the things that I want to be very forthcoming about is, in this particular case, you cannot separate race, gender, sex, gender-based violence, xenophobia, and misogyny. And in being so forthcoming about calling this a hate crime and asking for it to be treated as a hate crime, the response I've gotten from some Americans in this country has been incredibly shameful. When we look at an atrocious crime such as this one, in which 8 people are dead, 7 of them are women, 6 are Asian women, 3 were shot at close range, execution style in the head, the responses that I've gotten are that the women deserved it because of who they were. So I want to first address that and be very clear that these were mothers, grandmothers, people's family members. They were workers, they lived in our state, and they deserve more. I also recognize and acknowledge that this is not new. The attempts to humanize a perpetrator who has committed a violent, inexcusable act towards humanity. And the media botched this. To center the words of the suspect in custody, to frame it as somebody having a bad day, the failure to investigate this, to take time with this, to make sure that the victims and their families were centered, the failure to bring on diverse voices in their newsrooms, the failure to provide people who could understand cultural and language barriers. And as a result, the framing of what happened centered around the perpetrator. But we also know that this happens to Black Americans all the time. And one thing that I wanted to talk about is the show of solidarity from our Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, from the Georgia NAACP, from elected officials like Congressman Johnson, who have said, we feel your pain, we know it too well, we know exactly what you are going through. I wanted us as AAPI leaders to always bring that message forward, because we know too often people are trying to pit our communities against each other. We also know that we have work to do, we have healing to do, and I also want to use every opportunity to ask my AAPI community to show up for Black lives in the same way that y'all have shown up for us. The other thing I want to talk about is a lack of representation for AAPIs in every field. This is particularly even harder for the 5 AAPI elected officials in the Georgia General Assembly, because the weight has been on us to show up to everything, to speak up to everything, to take every media call, to work with our community to figure out what the next steps are, not just legislatively, but how can we help the families? How can we help our organizers? How can we frame the messaging in the correct way? And that is a huge burden to carry, especially because there are so many other things that we are simultaneously fighting for in Georgia. Because there are only 5 of us out of 236 lawmakers. There are 2 Democratic women, Senator Michelle Howe and me. And before this year, I was the only Asian woman out of 236 elected officials. We have also been tasked to represent every Asian American in Georgia as it pertains to any issues related to Asian Americans. Now, my colleagues, they do represent a lot of AAPI folks in the Gwinnett area, but I live in DeKalb. I live in Atlanta, DeKalb, close to where Congressman Johnson's district is. I have very few AAPI constituents, and yet the responsibility is always mine as well for every election cycle, for every candidate, for every issue related to the AAPI community. I am asked to, as well as my colleagues, to do that work. And we understand our responsibility. We care about our community. We love our community. We want to uplift them. We want to be there for them, but we cannot do it alone. We have other elected officials who represent Gwinnett. We have other elected officials who represent areas with significant AAPI populations in DeKalb, and we need them to help us. The burden cannot be ours alone. And in this specific incident, I know Senator Sheikh expressed his anger. I know that none of us have been able to even process the deep anger that we feel, the grief, the sadness. We haven't even had the time to do it. We had to immediately go into rapid response mode, and we haven't even had the space for ourselves to think about how it impacts us, and it certainly does. And the last thing that I'll talk about is some of the legislative things that Senator Sheikh mentioned that Representative Lim is also working on, as well as Representative Sam Park and Senator Michelle Howe. One of the things that we did see was a complete breakdown in the way in which law enforcement handled this case, not just from the perspective of the 911 call or the 911 and lack of language access, but the response at the scene. In Cherokee County, we had law enforcement detain the husband, the Latino husband of a victim who was dead inside the spa. And I cannot imagine that kind of trauma. Your wife dead inside a spa and you're being detained by law enforcement. And we know that the husband went to Spanish language media first. In Atlanta, we had one of the husbands of the victim also show up at the scene, pleading for help in Korean, unable to be heard, and he attempted to resuscitate his wife using CPR. There was a breakdown in protocol. There was a breakdown in cultural competency. And as somebody who was raised in a primarily Vietnamese speaking household, I, as a child, was always my mom and my dad's translator, and especially my mother and protector. Though they both speak English, they have a heavy accent. And one thing that we don't talk about in this country is what happens to people who have a lack of access to the English language, who speak with a heavy accent. They are treated as less than human. And I have seen that happen to my mom. over and over and over again. And I recall as a child having to stick up for her when retail workers, grocery workers, people decided that they didn't want to take the time to listen to her, that they did not even make eye contact with her, or they treated her as if she was stupid because she had an accent when she spoke English. That is a very real thing that people in this country live through when they speak English as their second language. And certainly in a scenario as traumatizing as this, I cannot imagine what the victims' families went through. So thank you for giving me the space to talk about it. Thank you, Congressman, for putting this together and for your solidarity. Thank you to my colleagues. I know the weight of the world has been on your shoulders and you have stepped up in every way. And thank you to the organizers who I know also carry this weight because there are so few of us in this state, and y'all are tasked to do the same work with every election cycle, with every immigration issue, with every criminal legal reform issue. Y'all are at the table. It's the same people over and over and over. So thank you so much for this time and space, Congressman.
Well, thank you for sharing your heartfelt observations and concerns. They are so meaningful. They were so gripping, and I feel you. And having gone through the insurrection on January 6th, one of those who were in the gallery up on the third floor of the House chamber when the attack went down, it was a very traumatic experience. And what you all have said thus far has taken me back to that traumatic experience in my own life. And I can only imagine how the trauma that you must feel in your community based on what has been going on. This did not just start, but it culminated in a awful way with the killing of with this massacre of 8 people in Atlanta, with 6 of those being Asian women. I can only imagine how the collective buildup of trauma manifested itself on that day, and now the AAPI community is left to deal with the trauma of the situation, still in the same wilderness that existed prior to March 16th. But because this has been a moment of awakening for people to see hate and to see racism on display against AAPIs, it now creates a situation where the wilderness will not be as bare as it has been, and you will not walk alone. So many are now walking with you, trying to understand. And so, thank you for your comments. And now we will hear from a man who has a history of caring for his community, but at the same time, other communities. And we were just on a phone call yesterday with members of the Jewish community that State Representative Marvin Lim has been working with on their issues. And so Representative Marvin Lim immigrated from the Philippines when he was 7 years old, came to Atlanta, and then eventually moved into House District 99 in 2001. And today he is the state representative from District 99. That is progress. Marvin epitomizes the American dream. Marvin, congratulations on your election, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Johnson, for many things, for this event, for the solidarity and allyship. And also, might I say, for being the most accessible member of Congress. Not to compare to anyone on this call, of course, you are my congressman since 2001, but as someone who's done a lot of advocacy across the 50 states with various advocacy groups, both Jewish groups, AAPI groups, et cetera, you are certainly one of the most accessible. On behalf of your constituents, including myself, I do want to thank you specifically for that.
Thank you.
It has been a difficult, very tumultuous time in Georgia. I was going to say in the last few weeks, but it also has felt like forever, because in part, this is hardly, we know, a new problem. We know, for example, anti-AAPI attitudes and violence are centuries long. And because of that, there is no one way forward or solution, as it were. And it doesn't help that to reiterate Representative Nguyen's very powerful words, which I could not restate better, arguably most of the narrative, particularly in the media, both here in Georgia and nationally after March 16th, has been around the perpetrator, his motives, and whether or not his act was a hate crime, which continues to be an open question, apparently. I do get the most questions personally about that in the media. I'm a little tired of answering it. That's not to say that that is not an important question, but beyond the fact that I think that it shouldn't be a question, so much of the narrative more broadly has failed to focus on the victims, their families, survivors, both Asian and not Asian, women and not women. Actually, one of them, Paul and J. Michaels, the 54-year-old Army veteran, I had later learned had just moved into my district just a couple of months ago because I'd been helping an HOA group here. It turns out he would become a part of that. So much of the narrative in the media and beyond has failed to focus on their lives that have been cut short. And that includes the triumphs and the challenges, of course, including their plight, whether that's their plight as immigrants, their plight in labor. And I think more broadly, it will remain very important to look at the plight of the AAPI community as a whole, as well as folks in BIPOC communities in general, communities that are traditionally disenfranchised. And that includes looking at the harms they face that don't make the news, not just because it might not rise to the level of a mass murder or might not even rise to the level of the crime, but also often because of the fear and mistrust API and BIPOC people have of our government authorities, even when interacting with them on the most basic things. And I think we've seen that especially in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. So as one of those authorities and as part of the AAPI Democratic Caucus here in the Georgia General Assembly, along with Senator Rahman, along with Representative Nguyen, as well as Sam Park and Senator Al, as well as an immigrant and an ESL language learner myself growing up, please know that we are trying to listen to people in our communities to center their concerns above all across the spectrum. And we're doing so in hopes of facilitating not just specifically reporting once crimes or bad things have already happened, but also more broadly facilitating participation across the spectrum, whether that's proactive outreach to law enforcement before anything happens, ensuring that law enforcement can do culturally and language accessible outreach to victims as well during the restitution process. But it also goes beyond law enforcement. We're looking at how government authorities can better serve the holistic concerns AAPI and others are having that are contributing to the fear and isolation, particularly during the pandemic, whether that's related to provisions of healthcare, housing assistance, and of course, Senator Rahman mentioned this, the elections process, all of which is generally not culturally or language, I'll also add disability accessible. And here in Georgia, and these are things that all three of us at the General Assembly on this call and others have been working on. But since even March 16th, we have seen some initial success on the law enforcement front. I myself have had initial conversation with our state's Peace Officer Standards and Training Council and our Georgia Chiefs of Police on how they can do that more culturally and language accessible work within and outside of the API community. And they are, as I would hope they would be receptive. I showed them, as I did with President Biden and Vice President Harris, a few of the resources we have developed, just crowdsourced in my own district regarding multilingual ways both private citizens and law enforcement can talk to each other, essentially. We'll be working to expand those. And of course, Senator Rahman mentioned his conversations with the governor. Representative Nguyen has also had conversations on the 911 piece with the head of our Georgia Emergency Communications Authorities. So I'll close by saying I look forward to working with them, with all of you all, to keep our government authorities particularly accountable moving forward, and to ensure that as we are fighting for our various communities, that after March 16th, AAPI communities can and will continue to be a part of the larger, I keep calling it the racial reckoning our country is having. So we will continue to fight, and above all, that means we will continue to listen. With that, thank you, Congressman.
Thank you so much, Representative Lim. And we will next hear from my friend Gwinnett County Commissioner Ben Ku, the first Asian American sworn onto the Gwinnett County Commission, making it more reflective of the county's diversity. He's a Georgia native. He's the grandson of Chinese immigrants who moved to Atlanta to help engineer the original MARTA heavy rail system. He's passionate about transportation, accessibility, and equity. And he's a man of great courage and tenacious spirit. For someone like Ben Ku to think that they could win election in Gwinnett County and to go in and then win that election and represent the citizens as he does. I'm deeply impressed with him and what he has done, and I'm proud to call him my friend. Ben Ku, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Congressman Hank Johnson, for those kind words and your friendship, and for holding this town hall and inviting me. You are my congressman, and Senator Rahman is my senator, and Representative Lim is my representative, so I feel very honored to be here with you all, sharing this platform. As said, I am Commissioner Ben Ku, and I represent the people of Norcross, Berkeley Lake, Peachtree Corners, Tucker, Lilburn, and Mountain Park on the Gwinnett County Board of Commissioners. Gwinnett is one of the most diverse counties in the entire nation. We have the largest Asian population in the state. Asian-owned businesses in Gwinnett generate nearly $4 billion a year in sales and employ about 19,000 people. I think I can speak for everyone in Gwinnett in saying that we stand in solidarity with the AAPI community during these trying times. In fact, language access and inclusivity was a common theme throughout our strategic planning sessions this week. I was watching a video response to the brutal murders. The response was done by an Asian American woman, and something she said particularly resonated with me. So many times in my life, I'd get that question, where are you from? Well, I'm from Decatur. The inevitable follow-up question would be, where are you really from? Well, I was born in Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta. No, where are your parents from? Well, my dad is from St. Louis, and my mom is from Connecticut. When I was young, my dad told me I was half Chinese, but all American. But these are just labels. I mean, we are all human. We are all people. We are all members of our global community sharing this planet we call Earth. To Representative Nguyen's comments, no human deserves to be murdered. I mean, the fact that she's even getting those comments is just appalling. There has been an alarming lack of compassion and understanding, particularly in the last several years. This is apparent in the rise of this domestic terrorism and in bad decisions by selfish politicians looking to pad their own pockets rather than representing the people. So let me take this opportunity to remind my fellow politicians who are not on this call, we are not here to pad our own pockets. We are all here to make our community better for all people and to do what's right. That's exactly why I was compelled to run for office. So it wasn't a choice. It wasn't really something that I had sought out, but I did feel compelled to start changing that perception. I wanted to have a seat at the table for our community, and to be part of the solution. And with that, our next speaker is actually someone who shares my values and has done more for collaboration and outreach in his first 100 days than has been done in the last several years. So again, thank you, Congressman Hank Johnson, for inviting me to this panel. And I'll hand it back over to you, or our next speaker, Sheriff Kibo Taylor.
Well, thank you, Ben, and very nice introduction of Sheriff Kibo Taylor. He's the Gwinnett County Sheriff, elected in November 2020 as Gwinnett's first African-American sheriff. And in his first days in office, he ended the 287G program and launched a community outreach section. 287G is a federal program that pretty much deputizes local law enforcement to become ICE agents. And it has terrorized the Gwinnett County community of migrants, people who have come to this country, work hard, pay taxes, and make life easy for others, but they've been terrorized under this 287G program, which Sheriff Kibo Taylor abolished in his first days in office. So thank you so much for doing that, Sheriff Taylor. He has launched a community outreach section for his office, and he's focused on building a healthy civilian-police relationship that will restore trust in our communities. And I had the pleasure of being with Sheriff Taylor around this time last weekend, and I enjoyed being with him very much. Sheriff Taylor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And also too, thank you, Commissioner Koo, for those kind words. I'm really excited about our work relationship and a personal relationship as we have moving forward. I've known you for a long time. I'm just excited about what we're going to be able to do out here. Also to Congressman Johnson, let me say again, thank you very much. Thank you for last weekend. I've been blessed with honor over the award that you gave me. And I thank you again for this opportunity, you know, for allowing me this opportunity to come out and participate in this. What I see in you, and I'll start by saying this, okay? What I see in you is a level of leadership that is missing throughout this country, okay? Now, I may get into a little bit of trouble about what I'm getting ready to say, but I feel compelled to go ahead and say it anyway. I'm not going to put all of what is going on right now and what happened on that incident on leadership in this country, but I'm gonna put a lot of it on leadership in this country, okay? And I'm talking about from the past president on down. And I got a saying, and sometimes I say it right, sometimes I get it wrong, but the meaning is the same. The only way evil can exist is when good men stand by and do nothing, when good people stand by and do nothing. So when you have a leader, what we had, that was set back and you see the things that spewed out of his mouth, the actions that he took. And when you had other people in leadership that refused to take a stand, refused to say anything, refused to step out and say, hey, you know what, this is not right, okay? We don't need to be dividing our country in the way that it is, whether it's racial, whether it's gender or whatever, okay? You know, but when you have people that don't want to stand up and take a stance against evil, then these are the things that you are that are allowed to take place. Now, I'm sorry for going into the politics of this thing, but it is what it is. Which leads me to the next point that I wanted to talk about. When we see violence here, okay, the violence that just, and it didn't just start with that incident here in Cherokee County. It didn't start with the incident that happened in Fulton County. We've seen an increase of violence in the Asian community over the last year since the former president stood up there and started talking about where the pandemic started. and villainizing Asian people for the start of a pandemic in this country. So again, I go back to that leadership. What are we doing? Who are we electing? Who are we bringing in, to lead our country? And then when you take even more of what happened and you see where the victims are now criminalized, they're no longer the victims. They're now part of a bad system. Well, they shouldn't have been here. They shouldn't have been there. And when you see mass shootings, I guess we're going to start talking about where people shouldn't be going to the grocery stores. Okay. But that's what we're moving, and that's where we are. And those are some of the situations that we're dealing with, as a country right now. But again, when we don't step up and we see something that is happening to our brothers or our sisters out here, and we don't take a stand and we don't do what is necessary or what is in our power to correct that, then these things will continue to perpetrate as we move forward in this country. So for me, I want to make sure that I'm the one in my small piece of the universe, okay? With this agency, I'm going to be the one that is going to create these levels of partnerships so that when we have issues, and I don't care what the community is, okay, we're going to give you the same service. We're going to give you the same level of protection, the same level of compassion, the same level of empathy that we would in any other community out here in Gwinnett County. And that's been my pledge. That's been my position even before I was elected. I started this campaign 2 years ago, okay, 2 years before I actually took office. And during that whole time, these are the things that I have been talking about as partnership. How does law enforcement come in and go back out and reach into the communities that has been so unrepresented? Well, guess what? The Asian community is one of these communities that has been unrepresented. And what we have to do is that as a law enforcement leader, it's incumbent upon me to be the one that takes this lead with my agency to make sure that we understand that we're out here on the forefront to make sure that the Asian community, the Black community, the brown community, Hispanic community, that LGBTQ community understand that we're the ones that are going to take the lead to make sure that we're creating that level of trust and transparency. We can't have these levels of partnerships when you don't trust law enforcement. And I appreciate you bringing up the fact that I did end the 287G program. But what we have to understand is that was a start. And people, talk about what a good thing it was that I did. But let me tell you something, that was so easy. That was something that I could do with the stroke of a pen, okay? It's an order. Hey, this is what we don't do. But guess what? Now the real work begins, okay? Now we have to be the one to get where my deputies are out in the communities where people can see us in capacities other than law enforcement. See us come into the community where you have an event and we're there to share and to partnership with, rather than coming in, to either affect an arrest or for another bad situation to where law enforcement is only seen when it is bad. So, moving forward, like I said, my work is ahead of me. But if I didn't think I was the right man and I wasn't up for the challenge, I never would have ran. But this is one of the most important issues for me. And then two, even looking at the perpetrator of this crime, which takes me back to another part of my platform is dealing with mental health issues and the mental illness. Mental ill out here. So again, I thank you for this. I thank you for this opportunity. I know our future is bright. Okay, we're going to have to make some changes. We're going to have to, make sure that moving forward, that we are bringing in leaders to lead in our local government, our state government, our national government, that where we're not just compromising and we're allowing evil things to take place and to exist. So once again, Congressman Johnson, I applaud you. I thank you and I bless you and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheriff. And next we will hear from Ms. Ling Chansey, who is the Executive Director of 9 to 5, which is a national association of working women. Well, she's the director of 9 to 5, the National Association of Working Women, where she is on the front lines working for women's rights through a gender and racial justice lens. And she is an activist, an organizer, and a champion of equity and liberation. She was born and raised in Singapore, and she came to the US to attend college at Washington State. And so at this time, I will turn the floor over to Ling Chansey. And after Ling, we will hear from LaVita Tuff, who is the Policy Director of for Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJ, in Atlanta, where she is known as a civic innovator and a capacity building expert. And in her role, she has worked to create and achieve language equity in elections for the AAPI and immigrant communities across Georgia. And she's worked to build out an immigrant-led statewide policy table known as the Georgia Immigrants' Rights Alliance. And then after LaVita, Bianca Giotishi, who is with Georgia Organizing, who is the Georgia Organizing Manager for the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, will speak. She works to build political power with AAPI women and girls across the state through grassroots organizing and structural change work. And she holds a master's in social work at Washington University in St. Louis and a bachelor's in international affairs from Florida State University. And then we will hear from Victoria Nguyen, who is Senior Vice President of the Center for Pan-Asian Community Services, which is the first, largest, and oldest organization in the US Southeast to focus on issues and concerns of Asian Americans, immigrants, and refugees. I know that we have a lot of speakers on this program, but it's important that we hear from them. And we do have a number of questions that have been asked, and I'd like for us to get around to responding to those questions. So I'd ask for your patience, and I would now turn the floor over to Ms. Ling Chansey. And Ms. Chansey, right after you, when you finish, then Ms. Tuff, you take over. And then when Ms. Tuff finishes, Ms. Jotishi, you take over. And then Ms. Nguyen, you move forward from there. I'm going to be off screen for a second, but I'll be listening. So thank you.
Good morning, and thank you, Congressman Johnson, for inviting me to this panel. I'm really angry. I wish I could do what the Reverend has said, to use love to conquer all, but this is not our reality. You know, we're here today talking about all the different perspectives and experiences. I am a first-generation immigrant, and I have been on the receiving end of racism, hate for a long, long time. This is a reality for all BIPOC communities. This democracy we're trying hard to maintain and hold was not built by our people. Let's be clear, it was built by white men who were slave owners. So I often question when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, is it really liberty and justice for all, or liberty and justice for some? Because of last week's massacre, we are here today. Yes, it was a massacre. It was not just a hate crime. It was a massacre. And we've seen these massacres played out in all our history books in recent years, and it continues to happen day after day. Sharing our experiences and speaking out against racism, misogyny, sexism, classism, xenophobia, and all the other isms you can think of. But this is not new. I've been reflecting this past week and this week on what is left in the aftermath of these massacres. We're left with the same racism, same sexism, same xenophobia that exists before, because all of this is rooted in white supremacy. And the question is, how are we going to change? How are we going to make people to change? Are we going to be able to use love to convince our neighbors? Or are we still going to be continued to judge based on our race, our skin color? So when I saw the agenda today that I'm supposed to speak about the efforts and way my organization is moving forward after this massacre, I would just say that my organizations and all the other organizations that are on this call today, we have been working on the ground day in, day out for decades and decades on this issue. We are building grassroots leaders and voices from the ground, but that is not enough, because the reality is this work is hard and we never have the resources to do all the things that we need to do. You know, we are either trying to introduce legislation for our community or training folks in the weeds. But this is not a one-off effort. All our organizations on this call today are doing. This is the work we're called to do, day in and day out. You know, for all C3 organizations like us, you know, and as an executive director, I can tell you, I'm out here in these streets every day, hustling for money. And money to do what? From money to change, to really make a change around all of these things that we've been talking about and people have shared on this call and on this panel. But it's not easy because money talks. And to be really honest, I'm really tired of talk. And our AAPI community and our BIPOC communities are suffering every day across the nation. We need a real plan on how we're going to fix it. We do not need more policing in our country, because we've seen what happens when communities of color are over-policed. The violent, how many more George Floyds are we going to have to lose? How many more AAPI women are we going to have to lose? I think this is not just an awakening or a reckoning. This is more than that, right? Because the root of all the things that we're discussing today did not happen today or yesterday. So I'm exhausted, I'm heartbroken, I'm angry. And I just want to say that you know, we have to make real change. And real change really stems from money, because money has power. And as a BIPOC community, we don't have power, real power, because all of us, you know, the community is relying on, you know, people of color leadership to get the money to fund this work. So today I'm asking Congressman Hank Johnson and the other congresswomen and state representatives that are on this call that we need real money. And we need $200 million today to be invested in AAPI organizations that are on the ground doing this work. That is real talk. If you want to make this change, you gotta have real investment. And the first investment is resources. And the first resource is money.
Thank you so much, Ling Ling. And next we will go to Miss LaVita Tuff.
Thank you so much for having us today, Congressman Johnson. We truly do appreciate your support. We do appreciate you continuing to stand in solidarity with the AAPI community. It means so much how you go above and beyond for the AAPI community, as well as communities of color all across Georgia, beyond your district. It is seen and it is heard and it is felt by all of us. So thank you so much for the role that you play in change. My name is LaVita.
Thank you so much. And I have just really been in awe of your commitment to humanity through the use of your law degree and membership in the state bar to work for justice for all people. And thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is LaVita Tuff, and I'm the policy director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta. And we are the first legal advocacy organization in the Southeast that works to protect, defend, and advance the civil rights of the AAPI communities. We have been extremely busy since this incident occurred because we have been providing a community-centered response with our community partners, some of whom are on this call today, to make sure that we were there to provide healing, hope, and support to the victims' families and also the survivors. We have done so much work year-round to make sure that we're advancing the rights of the AAPI community, that we were prepared and ready to take on the healing aspect of what took place. We know that what took place was stemmed and comes from white supremacy, and that the racism towards the Asian community is not anything new. We also know that in a state like ours, racism is a hobby for some, as we've seen elected officials take a direct aim at the voting rights of AAPI voters in communities of color. And we will no longer stand by and beg for visibility. We will demand it. And we ask that elected officials work with us hand in hand and not just have AAPI communities and communities of color in mind. The work that it's going to take to bring about change must be done cross-racially and in solidarity with one another. And we can do that. But we want to make sure that when we do that, we have the support of all forms of government, every single elected official here on this call and those who aren't with us any longer, to stand with us hand in hand and to make decisions that are community-centered, that take a community approach towards healing, restoration, and transformative change. That's what we want to see. We don't want to just see language access. We want to see language equity. We don't want to just see initial change with public safety. We want to reimagine how safety looks in our communities. It goes above being an ally. We're asking for our elected officials to be accomplices with us in bringing about change. So I'm so excited to be here in this conversation today to talk about ways we can do that. And as an organization, we will continue to lend support to the victims of this. We will continue to lend support to the survivors of this tragic incident. And we'll continue to lead on bringing about transformative change and holding our elected officials accountable to make sure that this is done hand in hand and not just in mind. So thank you so much, Congressman Johnson, for having me today.
Thank you so much, Attorney Tuff. And please give my regards to your mother.
Yes, sir.
Bianca Justici. I have just butchered your name. I'm so sorry. It is now your time.
Thank you, Congressman Hank Johnson. It is okay to butcher my name, but thank you so much for having us here and for letting me speak on behalf of NAPAF, the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. My name is Bianca.
Well, you know what? No, it's not okay for me to butcher your name. I should carefully try to pronounce your name. I should get out of my comfort zone and understand that the world is not just about American names, but it's about names from all over the world. We are global citizens. We should be global or world citizens. And so that means we should respect each other enough to try to get pronunciation correct. And so thank you so much.
Thank you, Hank Johnson. Thank you so much, Congressman Hank Johnson. This is why we admire your leadership and your power here at NAPAF and just beyond. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Bianca Jyotishi, and I am the Georgia Organizing Manager at the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum. Our work has centered AAPI women and girls. We've been an organization for the past 25 years,
focusing and building power, centering the work and the voices of Asian American, Pacific Islander women and girls across the state of Georgia. We focus on developing local AAPI leaders and pushing for structural change that centers the voices of those who are most impacted by our issues. This means we work to shift policies, local and state and federal policies, and our efforts are led by those who are impacted by our issues the most. So those who are working class citizens and non-citizens, immigrants and people who speak English as a second language, people who were educated in other countries and whose degrees may not matter here. Those are the people that we want to work with, build power, and fight for intersectional issues and fight for intersectional work that affects every single day of our lives. Our key issues that we work on are reproductive justice, economic justice, and immigrant and racial rights. And so this incident is really at the crux of the work that we do, focusing specifically on the intersections of race and class and gender. And so we predominantly operate in DeKalb County, where there is such a high AAPI immigrant population, and those who are directly impacted by these issues. A lot of the people in our base have been frontline workers who have been facing COVID, both in terms of the pandemic itself, but also the increase in AAPI hate and violence that we've seen in this past year alone. Even before, as so many of those who have spoken before me have said, this is not a new phenomenon, and we've still got a lot of work to do. We are talking about the PAGE Act. We are talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act. We are talking about forced sterilizations in internment camps, and also at detention centers, even just as recent as last year. So these issues are not just historic, they are also very much so relevant to our present times. Our 100 founding sisters really recognized that 25 years ago, this was like very intersectional to the work that we do and very needed to recognize the voices of AAPI women. In a lot of ways, we've been invisible or visible in the wrong ways. We have been hypersexualized and exoticized and reduced to sex objects rather than being seen as complex and powerful human beings and individuals. We were also targeted for hate in this particular incident because of the way that we are reduced to this identity of just being invisibilized. And we really need to flip this around. We need to be visible and seen for the complex and multi-layered human beings that we are, rather than the objects. The dragon ladies or the geisha girls or the people who just like say namaste and like wear bindis, that's more than what we are. We are actually here to fight for power and build that leadership at the local level. And so a lot of the ways in which we do this, we do grassroots organizing. We want to build power and have the people who are impacted by the issues drive the work. They should be the ones leading this movement. And so part of the way that we do this is by resourcing our communities, but our work alone isn't enough. The executive order that came out 2 months ago didn't prevent this from happening. And so we really need a long-term investment and sustainable investment, a long-term investment that is sustainable for our communities, that is accessible, both linguistically and culturally. We are talking about getting access to healthcare for our immigrant communities who now have to wait 5 years before accessing healthcare in this country, such as the HEAL Act, which would remove this 5-year bar that Representative Johnson has co-sponsored 2 years ago. And so in these ways, we need to be able to make sure that our communities are able to access the resources that they need to live the lives that they want without fear of going to their work, going to their place of worship, or just going outside to get the mail because of all of this hate and violence that has ensued over the past year and even beyond that. We need to be able to combat the model minority myth. We are not just the model minority. So many of our people are working class citizens who are frontline workers, and we need to be able to recognize that the work that we do needs to address that and be intersectional in that way. We also just want our communities to access resources that would help their day-to-day lives. It's been very difficult for community members to even find mental health resources that are linguistically accessible, finding a therapist who speaks their language, for example, or even just having to call about a bill that they've been overcharged for when they don't speak when they don't speak great English, and being reduced to somebody that's unintelligent because of that. So we have a lot of work that we need to do. One thing that has come up in this call, and one thing that I just want to reiterate, is that we build power together for collective liberation. We cannot be free unless we are all free. And so this just really speaks to the amount of solidarity that we have seen in light of this heinous incident. But I'm thankful for all of the community leaders who are here on this call, all of our elected officials, and who are just representing us and helping us spearhead this movement for collective change and collective liberation. So thank you so much, Congressman Hank Johnson, for being here, and thank you for recognizing the power that our communities have in this moment.
Thank you so much. And floor is yours now, Victoria Nguyen, Senior Vice President of the Center for Pan-Asian Community Services, also known as CPACS.
Thank you so much, Congressman Johnson. Thank you so much for all of your support over the years with co-sponsoring bills that impacts our Asian American communities over the years, and also being there, being present in the community and joining us as we fight for, all the resources and addressing all the needs in the Asian American community. And I wish that we were not meeting under these circumstances. And I acknowledge, and I also want the viewers or those who are kind of on the call to be heard, right? To also be, to know that they're not standing alone in grief. They're not standing alone in anger. They're not standing alone in fear for our communities as our communities live and thrive, or trying to thrive in the state of Georgia. We've been serving the Asian American community and immigrant communities for over 40 years now through community health, social services, capacity building, and advocacy. And we've seen, right? We've seen a number of our victims of gender-based violence, victims of domestic violence, victims of crimes targeted against Asian American communities. And this is not our first round. And this has to stop, right? We really have to kind of listen, right, to community organizers and also the legislators who see this, who understand that this is impacting their communities, their constituents, their clients. And I think we stand, with our communities when they saw the names and the pictures of our communities. They saw their moms, their aunts, their grandmas, their sisters, their daughters. And us together, we really need to work together to ensure that this doesn't happen to any families or our communities. And through the 17 different languages and the 70,000 immigrants and refugees that we serve, our mission is still to continue to fight disparities and to promote equity in our communities, and to ensure that direct services and needs address the communities as they need them. And that means when our victims are in the court system trying to seek health care, that they have individuals like them, right? Individuals that understand their needs, that can walk them through the process as they rebuild their lives. And not only the days to come, not only the months, but the years to come. We saw this in 2017 when our businesses were being targeted. And the challenges of those victims are still in need. They're still working 4 years after to seek justice, to seek care. And the violent crimes against gender-based violence in our communities, our businesses, our families, our elders has to stop. As COVID has happened, we have been shifting to ensure that our communities are served through mutual aid, rental assistance, food deliveries to our seniors, ensuring that our seniors feel safe as they go out to receive services and care and going to their health facilities, ensuring that we have these conversations with our youth, right, who are also processing what's happening, and working with our community partners to ensure that our communities are being served, right, served in a culturally and linguistically competent way, to ensure that language access as a direct service provider, that if these services are available, that we need to make sure these services are getting in the hands of the communities that need them, when they need them, and where they need them. We have just been so uplifted by all of the legislators, the organizers, the congressional leaders, the partners, many who are watching or on this call today, that's been working together. And thank you to the leadership of Asian American Advancing Justice for working with us and ensuring that the collective voice is being heard and uplifted. And our goal is very simple, to ensure that we center our Asian American communities, that we continue to support the direct service and community centers who've been doing this work for many years, to ensure that this work is not just beyond the media, that's not just happening when the media headlines are here, but we're working in the days and the months to come to ensure that these community members are rebuilding their lives with the loss of their community members. We want to make sure that community centers, the funding comes to these groups that are providing the support and the guidance, and acknowledging that the gaps in our communities are being filled. And we also want to make sure that education is clear, that we want our education system to talk about the Asian American communities, right? To talk about the history, to uplift the contributions of our communities, so that when we talk about crisis or rapid response for our communities, that people understand that the Asian American communities, the hardship is not new, that it's been happening. We also want to stand in solidarity with all that want to do something in our communities, but we also ask that the leaders of the counties and cities understand that our community-based organizations are kind of backing all of the burden right now of the Asian American community. We ask that you do listening sessions and forums, right? Work with community-based organizations to make sure that we are centering the voices of our Asian American businesses that are fearful, centering the voices of our seniors, ensuring that our youth have a chance to talk about what they're processing, what they're understanding, and making sure that we do it the right way. Right, that we don't rush into these conversations, and that when we talk about the hardships, we talk about what resources and what work is going to be present, right, to ensure that our communities thrive beyond these months of crisis. Thank you again, Congressman Johnson, and thank you everyone for, understanding the hardships of our communities.
Thank you, Victoria, and your comments are very well taken. Your passion, your strength, your sadness, your anger, your spirit, your determination, all shine through. You do not walk alone. So thank you so much. And at this point, I want to turn it over to our listening audience who submitted some questions. I have one from a woman who's, and Dean Carter, so it looks like it's only going to be me, Dean Carter, and Senator Sheikh who can respond to these questions. But there is one that's very important, and it comes from someone who says that having lived in many parts of the US and a Korean life partner, she observes that racial dynamics of AAPI hate go beyond repugnant white supremacy terrorism. A great deal of the bigotry comes from the Black community. What do you think is the source of this racial bias and conflict? And what is the Black community doing to educate and diffuse ethnic hate against the AAPI community? And it's from Aaron. And Aaron, thank you very much for your question. You have recognized something that not a whole lot of people will talk about. And I believe that you are sincere in bringing it up because I think it is a problem. That is that racial dynamics of the AAPI hate go beyond repugnant white supremacy terrorism. A great deal of the bigotry comes from the Black community. So there is bigotry towards Asian people from the Black community, from Black people. I won't attribute it to our entire community because of course, our community walked the road with Martin Luther King Jr. It was a road of nonviolent protest to secure our civil rights. And so we come from a history of people being respectful of others and loving and forgiving and welcoming. That is our culture, but there are some in our community who, out of ignorance, display bigotry against our brothers and sisters who don't look like us. And we should be the last ones to be bigoted towards another people. But unfortunately, some of us are bigoted, and it has evidenced itself a lot in the dealings between Korean merchants and inner city youth, Black. And And so I think that it's been my impression being around many Asian Americans and Asian Pacific Islanders who are also Americans, by the way. It's been my experience that you'll find all kinds of people with all kinds of biases and prejudices in those communities. And so when that matches up against bigotry coming from our community, then it's not a good situation. And that's not to say that every incident where a Black person displays bigotry towards Asian Americans, that it is the Asian American, it is their fault for it. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's misunderstanding and bias in both communities. From the standpoint of African Americans, like I said, we should be the last to stereotype and hate on others because they don't look like us. And I think that's just something that's a conversation that we need to have among ourselves, and we need to call it out whenever we see it, and it should not be tolerated. Any other panelists have anything they want to add to that response to that question?
Well, I might say is kind of ignorance, and even in AAPI committee, we have issued that anti-Blackness issue too. We have some of us, so we have to come together to work on this issue. This is the issue you're talking about. That sometimes I was in convenience store business for a while, and I have seen our API march, and we have a business maybe in API, in African American community, in minority community. Sometimes we don't, we get to work together, because a lot of times we have this friction comes in, because sometimes African American community thinks that Asian community, they're having a store in a liquor store or convenience store, whatever it is in our community, they're making money from our community and they're not respecting us. So these are the issues. This is the communication. We have to communicate each other. And the API community, when we have a business in African American community, we have to invest in our community. We have to have a good relation. I think most of us do. I'm not in that business anymore, but I know I have a complaint before. They say, oh, we have an API store in our community making all this community, and they're not investing. It's not necessarily true all the time, maybe in certain folks, certain people, but we have to take care. We have to be open. We have to work the real issue in our community. And that's the only way we can make a difference. We are struggling. All of us is struggling. And we got to stay together to make it better for all of us. As a minority, as an American, we might look different. We may come from different background. We may, we may speak different languages, but we all have values. We all want to have our children better education. We all want to work every day, pay our bills, to live in a harmony within our community. So those are the issues we have to talk. We have to come open. If we have an issue, I urge, to our community leaders or elected officials, if you see anything wrong in our community, something is not working in a harmony, reach out to us. We're going to reach out to you all too. So this communication is the number one issue, because all of us having trouble, and all of us are American, and all of us have got to work together. I urge you, if you have any problem in any community in Georgia, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to go. I have a complaint. Sometimes I get a issue that come from out of Gwinnett County, outside, way out Georgia. If I need to travel and sit down with the community leaders, faith leaders, or whoever it is, I'm willing to do it. We need to make a peace for all of us. That's my commitment to you all.
Thank you. Just because a shopkeeper might be having a bad day, his children or her children may have gotten sick or gotten in trouble, or they're having trouble with the family finances. And so the shopkeeper comes in and might be a little short with the customer. The customer can't then think that all Asian shopkeepers are this way. They disrespect me. They don't care. They talk down on me, that kind of thing. You can't make stereotypes and broad generalizations based on one encounter. And then also, some people, it doesn't matter who comes in, they're going to have a attitude of they're you know just they you know that's just their manner and their way. But we have to find a way of penetrating through the thickness of the veneer that they put up, and understand that that person has a heart, and that person feels pain and has issues just like you have, and they may not be making as much money as you think they're making. And then on the opposite side, the shopkeeper group of Black folks come in and they're talking loud and aggressively in their manners and everything. That doesn't mean that you should get afraid thinking that they're going to hurt you. That's just the way that Black folks do. That's the way we work with each other. We deal with each other. We talk loud. We're aggressive. But it doesn't mean we're getting ready to fight you, and you should not be afraid. And so these kinds of cultural differences, and also all Asians are not people who recede into the background and have no aggression about themselves. They can get a little lively and that kind of thing too. And if you don't understand that, you think that they are being disrespecting you. And so we have to put aside all of these stereotypes and false notions and generalizations and presumptions about people, and just deal with people for who they are. Get to know them and get to respect them and get to love them. That's what this is all about. Anybody else have anything they want to respond on that issue?
Can everyone
Dean
hear
Carter?
me? Yes.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
The person who asked the question struck a real, serious, true issue. There is tremendous bias within the Black community. But having said that, after 41 years as the founding dean of the Martin Luther King Jr. International Chapel at Morehouse College, which is the world's most prominent religious memorial to Dr. King, trying to make it a world house where everybody is welcome, no exceptions, where the programming includes everybody. Now, having said that, I want you to hear what I'm about to say. When I stood on October the 7th, 1979, to deliver my own installation sermon, in that sermon, I started out talking about the discrimination, the hurt, the pain, the victimization of different ethnic groups all over the world and in Atlanta. One by one, I call them. And I did not get halfway through the list before the audience, which was primarily Black, started to hiss me. They started to indicate their displeasure that I was listing all of these ethnic groups who had experienced injustice. And I smiled and kept right on talking, because I knew how the list was going to end. It ended with statistics of what has happened to Blacks and African Americans. But what that revealed is that every group thinks that it has a monopoly on victimization and on pain. Every group is segregated. Every group thinks that it is the only one being mistreated. And someone has already said it's ignorance. We don't know each other. So in 1999, I put up a picture in the King Chapel of Daisaku Ikeda, a Japanese world teacher, a Nichiren Buddhist. The students at Morehouse said, "Oh my God, Dean Carter has become Buddhist." I ignored them, smiled, and kept right on working. Today, everybody thinks I'm a hero because I welcome the world. My message, very simply, is this: never stop doing the right thing. Keep on loving the world anyway. Regardless of how you may feel and how lonely, you will be making progress every time you do good. I'm going to stop right there, but I have a whole lot more to say.
Well, I know you do, Dean Carter, and the reason why I asked you to give the invocation this morning is because I knew that you are a man of the world who respects all religions while being strong in your own Christian faith. Nice. And I just appreciate you so much, because that is the pathway that we have to move forward within, and you're leading the way, and I so much appreciate you. Thank you for responding to that question. We have another question. What steps can businesses, corporations take to help bolster increased support and solidarity for the AAPI community during these trying times? And that is from Sherry. I'll repeat that question. What steps can businesses, corporations take to help bolster increased support and solidarity for the AAPI community during these trying times? And that's from Sherry. Anybody care to answer?
Yes, it's Victoria Nguyen with the Center for Pan Asian Community Services. And as we're doing this work, we definitely need to partner with local businesses, with corporations. And, as we put out these solidarity statements or statements for the Asian American community, I really think that the businesses and corporations, please support us financially, support the organizations, support the victims, right? Support the work in the long run and not just kind of in the few days ahead. And we're only a week and a half after March 16th, right? We also need to have those conversations internally. I know that there are employee resource groups or business resource groups within the Asian American community that's also hurting. Please uplift their voices, right? Please support them, and also, helping to support their work with other Asian American organizations like ours, like those who are on this call. And also for the Asian businesses that are out there. I know the commissioners, the city councils, and various other groups, the sheriff's department, the DA offices, will want to talk, right? We'll want to have these conversations about what is it that our communities need. And I think this is the time for those who are wanting to listen to truly listen. And as we're hosting these conversations, please center our voices. Don't put us at the end, right? Make sure that when you are asking us what we need, center our voices and let us talk at the beginning. Setup is important. Are we sitting in front of a court-style tribunal system, or are we able to sit comfortably and show up as is and be able to share what we need, right, without having to stand up in front of those in badges, those with name tags? I think we really have to be intentional about how we listen to our communities that have not been invited to the tables in the past, right, have not even been able to knock on those doors to share what the needs are, or who have been discriminated already, in the past years. Right? And yes, COVID happened, and this is happening now, but we have to acknowledge that these communities were not connected before, or may have not been connected before. So that's what I would advise, and also encourage, is that when we have these listening sessions, please be intentional about working with community leaders who are already doing this work as well. Right? This is not something that's new to our community organizers of how to support our communities So please check in, and please also understand that we are shouldering a lot right now, as you can tell, right? It's emotional, that heartache is real, that this is our reality as Asian American leaders in this space. That not only are we trying to speak, and uplift our community voices, but we're also organizing, we're asking and knocking on doors and making sure that we call out all the, the discrimination and the bias before, or that our communities are not being prioritized, right? And it's prioritizing our communities, and now the floodgates are opening, and yes, we're at the table, but this needs to be a system in place for the long run, right? Not in the few days ahead, and then when the media goes away and maybe the funding ends, the immediate funding ends for our victims, that all of a sudden, our communities are still fighting again for visibility. So that's what I would leave with, is that's how we would, continue to work with businesses and also elected officials.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll go to our next question. It comes from Evangeline, and I guess she has heard the fact that our AAPI community is living in fear, facing discrimination, hate, violence, and she wants to know, how can the community help? How can I help on a local level?
I can take this one. This is Bianca with NAPOF. So NAPOF is actually a member-led organization, which means that we center those who are directly impacted by our issues, but we also are predominantly volunteer. Our direction is volunteer-driven. And so we have people from the community who actually participate in our efforts to spearhead strategy and spearhead direction. So that way it's entirely community-led. And so one of the ways in which we build power is just by organizing and mobilizing our people. And so part of even just being involved in the community is being a member of NAPOF. I would not be an organizer if I didn't pitch our work and pitch membership. So part of our work is really just about bringing in people, building a larger base. What we know and what we've seen time and time again, even in elections, even off election years, is that there is power in numbers, there is power in collectivity, there is power in the work that we are doing when we center those who are most impacted by the issues. And so get involved with our organization. Don't just get involved at moments like this when 6 people were murdered in order to take action, but actually stay involved with us long term. It takes a lot of grueling and long-term change that we're actually fighting for. And so to chip away at systemic racism and white supremacy that is embedded in our systems and in our structures, it takes a long-term fight. So get involved in our campaigns, get involved in local and state and national work. And that way you can see like the long-term impact of your involvement as well. So get involved with all of our organizations. We do incredible work, and that way you can be at the center of all of this fighting and all of this work.
I'll piggyback off of that and say that Advancing Justice Atlanta has been in direct contact with the families. And so I would ask that the local work that can be done is to respect the privacy of the families. Not every single member of the family who we've met with has asked that their mom be made into a hashtag or that their names be stated publicly, but that locally we do honor the lives of the victims and that we cherish the moments that they were able to have with their family members, and that we provide support for respecting the privacy of those family members by not uplifting their names, by not making hashtags. We have done a lot of work with these families directly. We have attended the funerals. We've partnered with Victoria, and Victoria has attended with us as well. And so there's so much work going on to provide healing and support to the families that there's an investment that needs to take place to continue that work. And so investing in the continued healing and support of those families is going to be key. It's going to be instrumental. And then also amplifying your voice against the things that are state-sanctioned violences against Asians in this country. So that's voicing out about deportations. That's about right here in Georgia, voicing out against the voter suppression bills that take a direct aim at AAPI voters and communities of color. Now is not the time to just stand by and be an ally. Now is the time to be an accomplice and to get down and dirty with doing the work that's necessary for us all to have transformative change across the board.
I would also just echo LaVita and Bianca, and also as an individual in the community, if you see this happening in your community, if you're witnessing this, please stand up. Please say something. Please don't assume that someone else is going to step in, right? And if you see there's, violence, if you see that there's discrimination, bias, misogyny, sexism, please, do your part. Please help us, find authority, find help, find support, and make sure that we speak up and not just assume that someone else that's on standby that's going to say something. So that would be my recommendation for those who are maybe not connected to some of the other sources, but that's something that you could do as an individual in the community.
One more thing I'm going to say, all of us has to take some responsibility. We cannot do it. I cannot do it myself. Congressman Hank Johnson cannot do it myself. Victoria, individually we cannot do it, but all of us, if we all of us contribute just a little bit, that we're going to go a long way. That we're going to go a long way. So that's what I'm going to urge. Let's work together. And this is just a beginning. And I always tell people that, hey, look, the district I represent, one of the most diverse Senate district in the state of Georgia, but this is what we're going to look like 20 years from now on. This America is going to look a lot different than the district I represent. So people from all different backgrounds, all different color, even AAPI community, all looks different. We speak all different languages. But I tell my folks, don't just go hang around with your folks looks like you. Get out of your boundary. Let's meet someone else. Let's go even AAPI committee. Let's go to other folks' meeting. Let's make the connection. That's the only way you can understand each other. That's the only way you can work together. That's the only way. There's no other substitute. No other substitute. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of the people who are in the chat. I just turned my attention to the chat and some interesting comments coming through. I appreciate everybody, particularly from May about being greatly disappointed that such an important discussion as the one we're having has not been more inclusive to people with disabilities. There were no CART, C-A-R-T, I don't know what that is, no ASL interpreter, and no one turned on the default Zoom closed captions. Auto captions are often inaccurate, but still better than nothing. And so we'll strive to be more inclusive of disabled people when we do these in the future. So thank you for that observation. The US citizenship civics tests only allows taking the test in your own language if you are over 50, 55, and a permanent resident of 20 to 15 years, respectively. This feels like a continuation of the Naturalization Act, Page Act, Chinese Exclusion Act, etc., aimed to restrict Asian immigration. What efforts, if any, are made to fully and finally remove barriers to Asian immigration? And that's May. Gosh, May, that's a issue of first impression to me. So in other words, you're saying that the US citizenship civics test only allows taking the test in your own language if you are over age 50 or 55 and a permanent resident of either 20 or 15 years respectively. I'm not sure what that means, but basically what you're saying is that if you're over a certain age, then you can take the civics portion of the citizenship test in your own language. But if you are younger than that, then you must take it in English. This feels like a continuation of the Naturalization Act, the Page Act, the Chinese Exclusion Act, etc., aimed to restrict Asian immigration. Well, I'm not sure that such a requirement would restrict only Asian immigration. People from other countries of other languages would be similarly impacted. I'm not sure what the reason for that requirement is, other than as at least gentle encouragement to know English. And maybe not so gentle encouragement, but almost a requirement that you know English before you can sit for the citizenship civics test. I don't want to say whether or not that's good or bad at this time without having looked into it and pondered it from a philosophical standpoint. But does anyone on the panel want to respond to that concern? What efforts, if any, are made to fully and finally remove barriers to Asian immigration as a result of this requirement on the U.S. citizenship test? Anyone else want to respond to it? Okay. Well, I'll move to the next question then. Are there efforts to recognize the history of Asians and Pacific Islanders, both painful struggles as well as positive contributions, into school studies? You know, I know that when I was in elementary school and coming up through junior and high school, and I graduated from high school in 1972. So I started school when I was in 1958 and worked my way all the way through to 1972. It was only, even in high school, there were the history of Black people in America was not told properly and was not told adequately. It was minimized, and the Native American history, they were characterized as savages, and there was no such thing as Latinos or Latinos that I can recall, and not much on Asian people either. But when they were, I remember the images of of various people, and they all played into stereotypes. And so since that time, our education process has changed. It has become more inclusive as far as Black history and Black people are concerned. And I'm not sure where it is as far as Latinos and Asians. I would assume that we have a lot of work to do. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I think that you're absolutely correct, Congressman Johnson. It's amazing. It seems like it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. And of course, we've been squeaking for 400 years, complaining. But you know, parallel to this discussion is also another serious issue, and that is that when I was in high school in Ohio, it was required to have a course on the American government. Maybe it was called civics. I believe that has been eliminated from the curriculum now. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that American citizens don't even understand how the American government works. And to me, these are two examples: the ethnic histories and an awareness of the American government. Removing those from the curriculum or weakening them are the tools of the master. Please hear this: the tools of the master. You can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And so there is a deliberate design in the American caste system to keep white supremacy supreme. So those are two issues that need to be addressed, corrected in the Department of Education by the new Secretary of Education.
One thing I just want to say something. Things are going to change. It's changing. This country is changing. If you historically, if you look at it, minority, we didn't have a seat at the table. African American have fought for all of us. I'm elected today because all the things that African American people the struggle for, fight for. We were on the sideline. We did whatever we could to help them. So, as an AAPI community, people from different background, different color, we are getting elected, in sheriff or DA or school board and county commissioners. So once we have a seat at the tables, things are going to change. So I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. You can expect things to happen overnight. We can expect. So I'm optimistic things are going to change, and things are going to change for the better.
To tag on to what Senator Rahman was saying, that is entirely correct. Having a seat at the table really helps. Now we've got representatives in the House, in the Senate, on the county commission, and it is amazing what just having that discussion with people of color in the room, in the positions of leadership, how much of a difference that makes. We had our strategic planning session this last 2 days, and the discussions there, you could tell the priorities were completely different than how they've been in the past. And just in the discussions and the way it happens, we are seeing that change, and I'm very excited about that. Obviously, we have a very long way to go, but that is starting and it is happening. So again, I appreciate my senator and my congressman and my representative for being there, being people of color, and again, shedding that transparency on these discussions.
Thank you. I've got a question here that has been used as a wedge issue. This issue, are there efforts to remove barriers that prevent Asians from being included or advancing? For example, exclusion from minority scholarships not considered diversity hires, Harvard and Yale's racial entrance rating systems, etc. So basically what May is asking about is a lawsuit that has been filed by Asian advocacy groups on behalf of Asian students who have allegedly been denied admission to Ivy League colleges, including Harvard and Yale, based on those institutions of affirmative action goals that promote the admission of African Americans to those schools. And so the question becomes whether or not the affirmative action programs of those schools to consider African Americans for entry into those schools at lower benchmarks than are available to to Asian American students, whether or not that is a denial of equal protection to the Asian students who were denied. And so it gets to the question of affirmative action operating to benefit African American or Black students who have been shut out historically of opportunities to attend those colleges. And I, for one, fall down on the side of affirmative action. Systemic racism against Black people in America is a fact, and it operates from cradle to grave, and it exists in the educational system from K through 12. And so, you know, there have been many African Americans or Black people who have who have been accepted to the Ivy League institutions throughout the years, and they have met all qualifications. But then there have been many who have met all qualifications who were excluded historically. So the question becomes, how do you make up the ground that was lost over 250 years, or however long those institutions have been in existence? But for Black people, 250 years of, well, actually 401 years of systemic racism that has created a permanent underclass that cannot escape those conditions. And so the question is, how do you uplift the those who are stuck at the bottom? And so affirmative action is a tool that can be used to do that. And it's not a matter of discriminating against others, it is a matter of reparation for those who have been excluded, and elevating them to a playing field that will result, when they graduate, of all of the benefits that come from graduation from these esteemed colleges and universities. We've even seen in the US court system where most of the judges appointed have come from the Ivy League institutions. And so, you know, there is a lot to be said for graduates or the ability to graduate from those institutions. And so the same way that affirmative action would exclude or would have an impact on the number of whites who are admitted, it would also have a impact on the number of other students who were admitted. But this is the collective price that must be paid for systemic racism against a population that has been denied historically, and it's time to make accommodations to rectify the harm that has been done. And so that's the proper way to look at that situation, at least as far as I'm concerned. May anyone else have anything they want to add to that? Okay.
So, Congressman?
Yes.
And so we work with, you know, a lot of low-income families, and I think this is also a question in a conversation around class and socioeconomic status. And, you know, as an organization that serves up to 500 youth that are matriculating into the collegiate spaces, I mean, we also have to talk about resources that are coming into communities, especially communities of color, right? Or lack thereof of resources that are coming into communities of color. And I went to, you know, underperforming school with a majority of immigrants and refugee students. And, you know, just recognizing that not all of our community members have or afforded all the opportunities that, you know, a lot of the other communities do, or a lot of community or socioeconomic status communities do. And I think that we have to kind of recognize that, you know, we're not all going in equitable or equal, right, into situations of when we're applying for college, working through FAFSA, or having the privileges of going to school without loans, or, you know, having access to loans. So I think that's something that we need to consider and discuss. And I'm sure these conversations are not new for those who are following, you know, conversations around affirmative action in schools. So I just wanted to share those comments.
Okay, thank you. We have two more questions that I'd like to get to before we break. I appreciate all of the panelists for hanging out with us for this long. And I appreciate all of those who are tuned in over Facebook Live for sticking with us as well. I hope it's been a valuable conversation. Asians have long been treated as others and routinely denied a seat at the table on racial conversations. Even the category of BIPOC, B-I-P-O-C, and I don't know what that is, Even the category of BIPOC highlights two racial groups, yet lumped Asians and Pacific Islanders into the figurative other bucket. How can we all work on changing that mentality across this country? And what is BIPOC, by the way? Anyone want to weigh in on this question? Should I read it again? Well, let me read it again. Asians have long been treated as others and routinely denied a seat at the table on racial conversations. So I guess that's the real issue right there. Even the category of BIPOC highlights two racial groups, yet lumped Asians and Pacific Islanders into the figurative other bucket. How can we all work on changing that mentality across this country?
I can say this. So we recently saw this with voter data from a very prestigious organization who put this information out about voter data, and they put Black, white, and then other. And so what my job to do was, that I made my job, was to request that the data be broken down to show AAPI, Latinx, and that it not just be grouped and lumped in other. And so I think that when you see things like that take place, that it's our job not to call people out, but to call them in, so that we can start to remove that label of other, so that we make sure that we're breaking groups down, so that there is the necessary representation of the different groups at the table, and it's not just a lumped in category of other. Because if we don't call those folks in, they'll continue to do that. And once I requested that information, that prestigious organization realized, okay, no longer can we continue to group in the data of voters, especially with just other, when there are so many AAPI voters who played a very critical role in changing Georgia.
Oh, I understand now. Thank you. And what is BIPOC? BIPOC?
Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Okay.
Yeah, and Congressman, I think when we're also talking about the other category, I mean, it's for us, it's a matter of life and death, right? When we're talking about key services, health services, social services, transportation, and if the data isn't being collected, the disaggregated data isn't being collected, we are not able to show the needs of our communities accurately. And that goes with COVID testing, COVID vaccines, that goes with all of the health, prevention, care services, victim services. And that's something that we have and we will continue to fight for, that when our leaders are grouping us into other, I mean, we've been fighting for visibility, and this is a way for you to make sure that our communities are seen. And when I say disaggregated data, the Asian American community is so diverse. We have hundreds of languages and dialects, different communities, different immigration histories, and that if we say even, others, right, or other Asians or Asian communities, sometimes we kind of lack, and we're not able to see the needs in communities that are struggling, maybe because they've recently arrived in the United States, or their history here in Georgia or in the South is a lot newer than some, or maybe their socioeconomic status looks different because of the different resources that are available for the different communities, the infrastructures that are being built for different communities.
I would like to make a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In the late 1980s, I was invited to be a part of Leadership Atlanta. During that whole year experience, we were not introduced to this kind of ethnic diversity. So this program is the first time I have been introduced to leadership in the Asian community after having lived in Atlanta 4 decades. And so I'm wondering, Congressman Johnson, is there a leadership DeKalb, a leadership Gwinnett, a leadership Cobb? And then I heard, I think Commissioner Ben Ku talk about his area as being the most densely populated Asian county. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we have the highest Asian population of all the counties in Georgia. And there
Okay.
is a leadership Gwinnett.
Well, now, I want you to hear my point, because if all the largest group of Asians are concentrated in Georgia, in his county, and there's a leadership named after his county program, then when people are invited to be a part of that program, that won't necessarily introduce them to leadership in Metro Atlanta, because it's so self-contained. Am I coming through? You understand what I'm suggesting? I want you to appreciate what this program has done for me. I'm not going to take the time to tell you how I'm going to respond, but I've got a specific program I'm going to inaugurate that's going to involve all of you. Now that I know you are there, you're not going to see me for the last time. I'll stop right there.
Thank you, Dean. I'll say that as a Black man, when I'm called upon to check a box, I'm only looking for what it says as far that relates to me. So when I see African American, bam, I'm gonna check the box and move on. I have the slightest idea of the fact that there are other demographics that have been excluded or marginalized by putting the other category. I just never have considered that before, and I appreciate the education that I'm getting through this dialogue that we're having today.
It is important that it's actually a checkbox and not, there's multiple forms that I've filled out where it's just a drop down and you have to pick one and there is no other category. And I don't fit those boxes. Again, when I check those forms, I'm checking white and Asian. I am biracial. I have two identities, and they cannot be separated.
Congressman, maybe I should make one more point. 41 years ago is a long time, but here's an interesting statistic. The president of Morehouse College asked me to send out the largest number of invitations possible to my installation. So I went to the executive director of the Regional Council of Churches for Metro Atlanta for help. He told me there are over 4,000 Christian churches in Atlanta, greater Atlanta, but that didn't count the non-Christian spiritual communities. So he gave me the address list, and we picked 1,300 addresses to send invitations to, 1,300. And the majority of those, over 1,000 of those, were to Caucasians, Anglos, white clergy. On the day of the event, after sending out 1,300 invitations, only 35 clergy showed up. Now, why did I tell you that? Because I want you to see how difficult it was 41 years ago, and I don't think it's that different today, to invite white leadership, religious leadership, to Southwest Atlanta, to what we thought was a safe place, a chapel named after Martin Luther King. They did not show up.
I think we would still experience that same phenomenon today. Mm-hmm. And it's up to us to make things better, to change. Our last question. The categorization Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders creates a verbalization that Asians, but not Pacific Islanders, are Americans. Should this change? So when we say Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, Does that mean that the Pacific Islanders are not Americans or somehow different than the Asian Americans? Why are we singling out the Pacific Islanders and not including them within the Asian American bracket?
Aren't the Pacific Islanders also referred to as a part of Oceania? We treat Oceania like it's a 8th continent.
Yeah, that one is that's beyond me right there.
And I appreciate that question. And I know the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities are often, you know, not brought to the table. And we can see here we don't have any Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander communities, you know, at the table. You know, our communities do exist here in Georgia in a growing community. And I think that's something that we all need to do better, right? Making sure that we include the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities and their voices, and support the infrastructure and capacity to support those who do currently live in the state of Georgia. But I think that's a question that we need to continue to ask ourselves, right? As how do we acknowledge the history of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders? You know, how are we including those leaders at the table? And how are we educating ourselves and doing kind of the research too, right? And making sure that those communities are not left out or invisible in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, everybody. That was our last question. It's been a long program, but I appreciate everyone for sticking it out. I hope that this has been valuable to everyone. I want to offer my condolences to the family, friends, and the greater community that is so traumatized by the killing of the 8 innocent lives. I want to, my heart goes out to everyone who is suffering, and I'm suffering, I'm hurting also. And I hope that this exercise that we have done today, this dialogue, has been helpful to those who have been, to our Asian American and Pacific Islander community. I hope it's been instructive and valuable to the greater community within which they live. I hope that this can lead us to forge greater bonds of understanding and friendship and ultimately love between people and between communities. And I want to thank my staff for everything that they have done to make this event what it has been. And everyone, please consider me and my office to be a resource to you. And once again, thank you so much, everyone, for being on this call. And does anyone else have any parting comments? I should never ask that, but I just want to make sure. So
Only thing I said, thank you. It's been a long, looks like long, and all the people that listening, thank you to them too, all the people that are listening.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. So have a peaceful day. Have a loving day. Do something nice for someone. Don't just think about yourself today. Think about others. How can you serve? And thank you, everyone. We're signing off now. Have a nice day.
Thank you.